Greetings, world. We are the AEGIS Alliance, with anonymous allies, here to expose compelling, extensive investigative journalism evidence that uncovers an alleged police double murder cover-up. Who are the true killers in the 1988 murders of Cathy Sue Swartz and Christina Y. Shelton in Three Rivers, Michigan? Three Rivers, Michigan in St. Joseph County. There is reason to allege that former Detective Sergeant Mike Money and former Officer Michael Costello committed the murders, and that Robert Odell Waters was innocent. Joshua Thomas Barnes alleges that when he was 12 years old in 1988, Mike Money, formerly of the Three Rivers Police Department, assaulted him in an unprovoked attack. Barnes had suffered from falling downstairs and fracturing 3 vertebrae 2 years prior. There were several witnesses, including Mr. Barnes's childhood friends. It's alleged that the assault was brutal, that Money strangled Barnes with his bare hands and threatened to kill Barnes as Money laid on top of him, holding him down and bending him over backward on the hood of a squad car. It's alleged that Money called Barnes a little effing gay expletive and a little female P-word expletive, and screamed profanities and death threats directly into Barnes's ear, with Money's lips touching Barnes. Barnes stated that Money was just big enough that he was unable to push him off of him, and the harder he tried to get out from under Money, the harder Money laughed. Mike Money's actions that day subjected Barnes to emotional and psychologically traumatizing torture and damage that still lasts to this day, as Money tried to get a false confession out of Barnes, insisting that he had spit at or on the squad car. In 1988, Money was a white male, and in 1988 he was about 22 years old, standing 5 foot 2 inches and weighing around 135 pounds with a stocky build. Money had short blonde hair with a long feathered hairstyle and a fair skin complexion. This is almost identical to the woman who was seen leaving Cathy Sue Swartz's Riverside townhouse apartment around the time she was murdered on December 2nd in 1988. Money lived just north of the townhouses with his family, just minutes away. Money's sister went to school with Swartz, and so did his cousins, a couple of girls from Mendon. The incident with Barnes occurred just months before Swartz was strangled and stabbed to death in her apartment. There was also a traumatizing incident inside a police squad car with Officer Michael Costello that I will explain later, along with alarming alleged misconduct by Costello. Mike Money choked me and put his hands on my friend Jason Schutz, and my friend Jeremy Price as well, Barnes stated. Jeremy's the one that Costello took for a rough ride with me, when he continued to allege. Back in 1988, Michael Money was also known to have had a short temper, or short fuse, as previously described in the alleged assault against Joshua Thomas Barnes, who was also described as seriously nasty bare-handed chokehold and psychopathic tendencies. There is reason to believe it was very odd that Money later became a detective who was in charge of investigating Swartz's murder, right up until his early retirement. Money decided to retire early so his wife would be able to follow her dream of working for FedEx, even though numerous people have heard stories of him and Michael Costello's involvement in her murder. There was a suspicious fatal car accident that Swartz's friend and neighbor Christina Y. Shelton was involved in less than 1 hour later, only a few miles away from the apartments where both women resided. Shelton's car had supposedly veered off the road and into the St. Joseph River for no apparent reason just after noon. The car landed around 3 to 10 feet from the shore in about 5 to 10 feet of water, depending on which article a person reads. Despite the Riverside Apartments manager falsely claiming Swartz and Shelton lived on opposite sides of the complex and didn't know each other, there's the fact that if you were to walk just 200 feet to the left of Swartz's apartment, you'd be in front of Shelton's apartment. It was reported at the time that 2 rescue workers helped a cop, Michael Costello, out of a partially submerged car during the time Shelton drowned. Shelton was pronounced dead at the Three Rivers Area Hospital at around 2 p.m. Her 4-year-old daughter had been hospitalized for some time and suffered from the effects of nearly drowning. However, the daughter miraculously recovered completely with no signs of brain damage after being submerged for more than 30 minutes. Juanita Truckee is Mike Money's mother, and when given the opportunity to defend her son, she did not. A woman named Deborah Halleck commented that Christina Shelton, who drowned in the river, was a witness to the Swartz murder and was run off the road by Michael Costello on her way to the sheriff's office, because she knew suspect Mike Money was a TRPD officer. Lastly, the comment says Shelton's child was moved out of state for her safety. Rather than defend her son, Truckee replied with, "This is not true. The child remained and went to school in Three Rivers." But that was all Truckee was contesting. She did not defend her son, Mike Money. Some of the locals in southwest Michigan had reported at the time that a squad car forced Shelton's vehicle from Schweitzer Road and into the St. Joseph River. Locals thought she was trying to outrun the Three Rivers police to get to Centerville, where the sheriff's department is, just a few miles away. It's alleged that Shelton witnessed cops entering Swartz's Riverside townhouse apartment back in 1988. It's alleged Christina Y. Shelton had heard Swartz screaming for help as she was being brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly before her ultimate demise of being strangled to death. The newspaper covering Christina Shelton's fatal car crash left out the Swartz murder that day. Locals had also reported at the time that Michael Costello was at both scenes immediately upon the call from dispatch. Costello allegedly attempted to get Shelton and her daughter out of the car before the rescue divers were able to arrive on the scene. It's alleged that Costello had rushed into the water to ensure that Shelton never surfaced, so she would not be able to tell anyone anything about what she may have or may not have seen or heard that day. It's also alleged that Shelton's daughter was taken to Ann Arbor for treatment to make it more difficult for local law enforcement to be able to reach her. Reports about the Shelton drowning stated there were no guardrails on the side of the roads during the Shelton drowning. However, there is clearly what appears to be a bent-up and damaged guardrail at the scene. According to Barnes' uncle, while at the TRPD, he overheard two cops arguing with or about Michael Costello being involved in Shelton's accident. The uncle said he also heard the cops talking about Cathy Sue Swartz calling and asking about charges against her that she may be facing due to the cops coming and taking her drugs and money, and the police saying they would be back with a warrant. It's possible that police conducted an unreported drug raid which led to Swartz calling the TRPD. You'd think that the cop who had to break it all up, the same Michigan State police officer who pulled the uncle over for DUI, would have been questioned. As far as we're aware, nobody contacted Barnes' uncle about this, not the Michigan State Police, the FBI, or Crime Stoppers, even after Barnes had sent in the information. Christina Y. Shelton's car crash on December 2, 1988, is not listed in a database search for vehicle and road traffic accidents in Three Rivers, Michigan in 1988. Officer Matt Stark in Three Rivers, Michigan, whose father is Earl Stark, the former chief of police, told Barnes that his dad personally threw Costello out of the TRPD back in the early 90s. It's been said that Costello lost his job at the TRPD after he showed up at the police station in the middle of the night, off-duty, with a 14-year-old girl who had been reported as missing. He said he had found her out wandering the streets. However, it's been known that Costello was fired after 2 city commissioners and a couple of detectives held a closed-door meeting unlawfully. The exact outcome has been kept under wraps, but that's when he was let go from the TRPD with a letter of recommendation. A lawsuit was brought against those involved, and while Assistant Prosecutor Jeffrey Middleton admitted that there had been wrongdoing with the unlawful closed-doors session, he chose not to press the charges. There is a local newspaper print from 1998, 10 years after the Swartz murder, titled, "Authorities Still Hope to Find Killer of 2 Area Women, Not Just One." A lower article starter title reads, "Police Continue Investigation in 1988 Stabbing Death. A blood stain on a pair of sweatpants in the Swartz residence after the murder that police thought resembled a pair of scissors. After tweaking the colors on the sweatpants, it brought out a pattern on the brown one that matches the blade Mike Money was practicing with 20 years after the Swartz murder. A suspect allegedly wiped the blood off in an upwards motion and cleaned the blades before leaving. To be noted, Mike Money had been seen practicing with 2 large bladed weapons 20 years after the Swartz murder. Blood splatters from the crime scene do not look like they were from a running woman. A long-range weapon like blades on a pole can cause blood splatters to look like this, and the long-range weapons would also be able to avoid getting any blood on the attacker. There's also the theory that the blood splatters could have been caused by an unconscious Swartz being carried. We ran a Facebook ad targeting St. Joseph County, Michigan, in the county where the murders happened, and locals came forward, including Cathy Sue Swartz's own cousin, Mary Wilma. Swartz's mother and Mary Wilma's father are brother and sister. We had heard rumors before that the TRPD was involved in drug dealing, including cocaine back in 1988. Cathy Sue Swartz's cousin, Mary Wilma, has stated that Swartz was selling cocaine for the police and she wanted out. She wanted to get married and have a baby. It was her dream. There is a woman who was living in Three Rivers, Michigan, who alleges that in 1988, Officer Costello tampered with her breathalyzer test to make her fail it and get sent to jail. Another officer at the scene noticed what Costello had done and stopped him from arresting the woman. The woman wishes to remain anonymous at this time. There are also locals who partied with Costello and Moni back in the 1980s, and they've described parties filled with alcohol and drugs, including cocaine, and there was often underage use involved at the parties. Swartz's cousin Mary Wilma brought up a rumor we've heard before, that Mike Moni was seen leaving the Swartz apartment dressed as a woman during the time of the murder. Joshua Thomas Barnes has previously alleged that Moni may have put on Swartz's clothes when leaving the apartment to disguise himself. This would fit into the description of the woman who was seen leaving the Swartz residence at the time of the murder. Locals and Joshua Thomas Barnes have alleged previously that drug dealers were selling cocaine for the TRPD back in the 1980s. Barnes has told us that back in the late 1980s, Mike Moni was stalking a girl named Shauna Trini, who used to date a guy named Sam Spicer. In a South Bend, Michigan WSBT TV Channel 22 news article from 2013, Mike Moni stated things about how the murder suspect would need to have some type of shoes or footwear on. And so, what did you do? Did you take the footwear off and change it? Did you use some of Cathy's clothes, her boyfriend's clothes? Then, near the end of the article, David Swartz, father of murder victim Cathy Swartz, stated, "They can tell you the kind of shoe the person wore." On Sunday, December 4th, 1988, just 2 days after the Swartz murder, the South Bend Tribune in Indiana reported that police were seeking Swartz's boyfriend, who authorities wouldn't identify, and that her body was found by a friend around 3:30 p.m. that they would not identify. The area of the South Bend, Mishawaka metropolitan area is part of both Indiana and Michigan. On December 6, 1988, the South Bend Tribune then reported that Swartz's body was found by an acquaintance instead of a friend, and that Troy Schultes, who is now being called her ex-boyfriend instead of the fact that he was her current boyfriend before she died, had been apprehended by police and was in the St. Joseph County Jail. But Schultes was actually charged on December 2nd, the day of the murder. The TRPD charged Swartz's boyfriend Troy Schultes on December 2nd, 1988, the same day of the murder, before questioning him, and the courthouse closed by 4 p.m. It's believed that Schultes never had any serious criminal history, no record of domestic violence between him and Swartz or anything like that, but police still decided to charge him before they even spoke with him. Police arrested Schultes while still searching his home on the 4th for any evidence that could link him to the murder. Schultes was held for 8 more days despite being cleared by exclusionary evidence. This is because the police knew that people were going to be demanding answers in regards to the rumors spreading around about police involvement in the murders. In this old newspaper release from the South Bend Tribune not long after the Swartz murder, it states that Swartz's body was found by a friend. It also says Swartz's former boyfriend was later released from custody after being cleared by police. It mentions that TRPD Police Chief James Riffenberg did not rule out a connection between the Swartz murder and Shelton drowning. Also confirms that Shelton's daughter Sarah was taken to a further away Ann Arbor hospital, while Shelton was taken to a nearby Three Rivers area hospital. The report also shows that Swartz's time of death was between 11 and 11:30 a.m. The paper described Cathy Sue Swartz as a gentle, compassionate, and happy person who kept her doors locked and stayed home most of the time caring for her young daughter. The newspaper also notes that Swartz and Shelton lived in the same apartment complex. In this March 20th, 1989 report from the Tribune months after the Swartz murder, we're told that Swartz's body was found by a friend, only to turn around and later claim her body was found by her so-called fiancé, Michael Leon Warner Jr., upon his return from work at around 3:30 p.m., when his work shift ended, and 4 p.m. In a Wood TV 8 article from May 5, 2023 by Ken Kolker, Warner's mother is quoted as saying he found Swartz's baby crying upstairs, that Warner went up there because he couldn't figure out why baby Courtney would be crying, because her mom should have been there. However, in a contradicting article also from Wood TV 8, and also by Ken Kolker on December 16, 2023, Warner said he didn't think much of the drops of blood because he thought Cathy had cut herself. He said there was more blood smeared on the wall as he went up the stairs. Then he says he found baby Courtney standing in her crib in her bedroom, not making a sound. So, was the baby crying, or was she not making a sound? Could Warner not figure out why the baby was crying, but saw blood on the stair railing? Or did he see drops of blood and blood smeared on the walls? Was the baby crying or just standing? Was the baby found in her crib, as Warner said, or in a playpen, as prosecutor Jeffrey Middleton said? Michael Leon Warner Jr.'s parents got divorced around the time Warner has said him and Cathy Sue Swartz were supposed to have gotten married. which is odd timing. On the 3B District Public Online Criminal Case Lookup Database, which is for St. Joseph County, Michigan, it shows charges placed on Michael Leon Warner Jr. with a 1969 birth year, including being found guilty of driving while intoxicated with an open container in the vehicle in June of 2000, may include a guilty judgment of driving under the influence of a controlled substance in September of 2000, not guilty of domestic violence in September of 2000, not guilty of domestic violence, but guilty of assault and battery in September of 2005, found guilty of cocaine or meth use in May of 2023, while the possession charge was dismissed. Dismissed charge of selling or furnishing alcohol to a minor in August of 2011. Guilty verdict of child abuse in the 4th degree in March of 1997, while the home invasion in the 2nd degree charge was dismissed at that time. A dismissed charge of domestic violence and a dismissed charge of illegal breaking and entering without owner's permission around November of 1998. We've also uncovered 2 contradicting news reports from woodtv.com Channel 8 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The 2 articles tell a different story about how the still-alive baby was found at the scene of the murder. One news report says Warner was 18 when he came home from work on December 2, 1988, and discovered Swartz's body. That Swartz was 19, he called 911 and grabbed her 9-month-old baby daughter from her crib in the adjoining room. However, an article that was published 1 week earlier is telling. It states that Tom Bringman, who became the Three Rivers police chief in 2007 and retired in 2021, was 14 years into his career when Swartz died. He and fellow officer Mike Money were the first to see her body. He said they cleared the home before getting Swartz's baby out of the next room. Jeffrey Middleton was the assistant prosecutor when the Swartz murder happened, and he ended up being the prosecutor. Middleton said that's the case he worked the most on, and then he ends up being a judge that he still sits as today. This newspaper release on December 4, 1998, had prosecutor Jeffrey Middleton saying that Swartz's ex-boyfriend found her and was later arrested, but released. Middleton also said Cathy Sue Swartz was killed sometime between 5:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. when they knew she was murdered at around 11 to 11:30 a.m. Mike Money's look in 1988 matched the description of the person in the criminal sketch who police wanted to question about the Swartz murder. During Money's 2013 interview with WSBT22's Kristen Bean, a partial sketch of a person is shown, who for some odd reason is not labeled as a suspect during the news story, who was witnessed leaving the Swartz residence around the time she was murdered. The detailed physical description that originally accompanied the sketch was completely left out. This may be because 25 years before the sketch was shown during Money's interview, the original version was complete with the long feathered hairstyle that Money had back in 1988 that was used to describe a woman who was seen in the area the same day as the murder. But according to police, this individual from the sketch was not a suspect, but was instead being sought by authorities who hoped she may have heard or seen something that day that could help investigators who were working the case. Why would the lead detective in a homicide case that he was suspected by many locals of being involved in crop out the feathered style hair from the police sketch before displaying it during his 2013 interview with the media? Perhaps because in 1988, he matched the description of White around 22 years old, standing about 5 foot 2 inches tall, weighing about 135 pounds, with a stocky build, just like the individual who witnesses described that day. He also had blonde hair with feathered long hair at the time. Police sought to question the so-called woman in the sketch, but then suddenly changed their minds. The whole reason the sketch was created in the first place is because the person was actually meant to be a suspect. The nerve of this guy, Mike Money, who has repeatedly wrongly reported Mr. Barnes's content regarding these cases as false news in the Crooked Cops Anonymous Facebook group. However, his reports don't stand up to scrutiny. All of these news reports around the time of the Swartz murder that wanted to identify the Swartz murder suspect and the person in the police sketch never actually showed the sketch. During a WSTV 22 special video about the Swartz cold case murder, locals commented about what was on their minds. Comments included, "Wasn't it a cop that murdered her? I remember some rumors," with a reply to that comment that reads, "It was Detective Mooney, sick." And another comment where one user says, "Wow, the sketch looks just like cop," when referring to seeing Mike Money in the video. It appears that the TRPD has closed the Swartz case on a police department investigative level after 35 years because another person was arrested for the murder on April 30th, 2023. The Cathy Sue Swartz cold case was never actually submitted to the FBI as the law required. Her case could not be found on any of the government websites that list cold cases, and it was Mike Money who was said to be in possession of 20 boxes or so of evidence. The suspect, named Robert Odell Waters, supposedly committed suicide while awaiting to be extradited to Michigan. However, there was conveniently no surveillance footage of Waters' jail cell at the time of his supposed suicide. Waters will also never get a chance to testify in court and try to prove his innocence. How convenient. Robert Odell Waters had found out that his family was being shunned and harassed from day one. Waters' daughter swears up and down that both the footprint and fingerprint did not match. Just when and where did Waters move exactly? Waters' daughter was born in Phoenix, Arizona in January 1989, so Waters had already been living in Arizona for some time before the murder. Sam Smallcombe, now a detective, was investigating the Swartz murder, and he has stated that Waters was not questioned in the initial investigation because he moved to Phoenix, Arizona back in September 1988, before the December murder. Waters was allegedly found in the Three Rivers High School freshman yearbook, but not in any years after that, not in the sophomore, junior, or senior years. According to what Missouri State Trooper Opie Taylor, aka Pepper Walker, who was a childhood friend of Joshua Thomas Barnes, was told by a woman who went to school with Waters. One thing that needs to be looked into is where Waters filed his first income taxes at. According to a Watershed Voice news report, Robert Odell Waters was apparently arrested before the DNA and footprint analysis results even came in, after he went in willingly, according to St. Joseph County Prosecutor David Marvin, who worked the case in 2023. Robert Odell Waters was arrested on April 30, 2023, and Prosecutor David Marvin filed an authorized complaint on May 1, 2023. On May 6th, Waters was found dead in his jail cell, and on May 8th, Marvin stated he was still waiting on 2 out of 3 crucial pieces of evidence. The St. Joseph County prosecutor had also said he won't drop the Cathy Sue Swartz case after Waters' death in police custody. However, nothing has come of the case since that time. Marvin is quoted by Watershed Voice as saying, "It would be terrible if that footprint came back and it was not his, because that means there's a third person, and I don't know who that is." The Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, became fully operational in 1998. It wasn't until 2012 that Detective Michael Money entered DNA evidence into CODIS that was supposedly found on Swartz's telephone at the Swartz apartment. Money only submitted the DNA evidence after being contacted by the Michigan State Police, who suggested that he do so. Mike Money said at the time that the fingerprint was just recently found, while the MSP knew about the fingerprint on Swartz's pink GT telephone since 1988. The story also changed and evolved over time from saying authorities had blood and footprints, or a fingerprint and blood evidence, or just a footprint, and it changed into being a bloody fingerprint. However, no match was made from the DNA or fingerprint at that time in 2012. It appears that Money was seemingly just holding on to that fingerprint for a rainy day. In fact, there was never any mention on the internet in any online news article about the fingerprint being bloody, until Wood TV8 reported on it in May of 2023. MSP officer Ken Laninga said in Wood TV8's special called Left in Blood that although some of the evidence had been lost, they still had the bloody fingerprint found on Cathy's telephone and several other fingerprints, as well as the blood and water mixture, bare footprint from the bathroom floor, so they thought they were going to catch the suspect right away. To be noted, the fingerprint was found in Swartz's bedroom with the phone line cut, and the bloody footprint was not Robert Odell Waters' blood. Investigators believed the killer had washed up in the bathroom before leaving, yet they left the water running until MSP crime scene investigators arrived on the scene. To be noted, the water can be seen running hours later in the MSP video footage of the crime scene. The drain was pulled as well as the shower curtain, but both of those items disappeared along with hundreds of fingerprints. Laninga went on to say that the Three Rivers Police Department became very familiar with the footprinting process, grinning as he explained how odd it was to be using a bare footprint as evidence in a homicide investigation. He then says that the Swartz case was the only case he knew of that a bare footprint was being used in such a manner, prior to or since the Swartz murder. In 2012, retired Detective Baker was told by Detective Money that a bloodstain had been found on that same phone. This leads to basic questions. Why was the bloodstain not found until 2012? Had the phone been kept in a freezer for 24 years? Or had it just been lying in a 1988 storage bin until DNA was tested in 2012? Besides that, Waters' fingerprints were also collected in 2011 when he was arrested in South Carolina that I will show proof of later. The timing of the discovery looks highly suspicious. Robert Odell Waters was also arrested in Arizona in 1989 for a misdemeanor when he would have also been fingerprinted. DNA evidence wasn't gathered in Michigan until 1990, but all of a sudden this happens to pop up 22 years later in 2012? That doesn't add up. To contain any DNA after being stored for 24 years, a bloody fingerprint would need to be stored in a cold, dark, dry, and sealed environment with minimal oxygen, no handling, no heat, humidity, light, or air, and at around 39 degrees Fahrenheit, such as in a laboratory-grade refrigerator or freezer. Without these ideal conditions, the DNA would likely be too degraded for forensic analysis. In fact, storage conditions are well known to have not been optimal when it came to crimes from the 1980s and 1990s, when forensic standards were less rigorous. Detective Sam Smallcombe stated in an old news report that the only time that Mr. Waters was listed was that he moved to Arizona in September before the murders. So I think as far as the original detectives were concerned, he moved out of the area before the crime occurred. Notice how Smallcombe slipped up and said murders. Not just one murder, but two when referring to the Swartz murder. Joshua Thomas Barnes spoke with Robert Waters' brother-in-law, who claimed his sister Julie met Waters in Phoenix, Arizona around 1986 or 1987, sometime before the 1988 Swartz murder. There are a couple of newspaper prints, and one of them, Michael Leon Warner Jr., a supposed boyfriend of Cathy Swartz, claimed that Robert Waters had shown up to the apartment with a girlfriend about a month prior to the Swartz's murder. In the other article, Mike Warner claims that he had ran into Waters, who was visiting the area, and invited him over to the apartment. Warner recalled that Robert Waters had already moved to South Carolina, but was visiting Three Rivers, Michigan, when he ran into him and invited him over. Warner said after that he never had contact with Robert Waters again. The problem with this is that Robert Waters had permanently moved to Phoenix, Arizona months before the Swartz murder. But wait, if Warner never again had contact with Waters after that visit, then how did he know that Waters was living in South Carolina? Robert Odell Waters had visited the Swartz apartment 1 month before the murders, so it's very likely that his DNA would have been at the apartment, along with his fingerprint, and this does not make Waters look like the killer. There was no sign of forced entry at the Swartz home, which is common knowledge, and cops often carry lockpicks. It would seem like a waste of time and resources to fingerprint both men and women, if police already knew the DNA gender of the suspect who left the bloody fingerprint, then to not say which DNA gender the suspect was. If everyone, men and women both, were being not only fingerprinted, but footprinted too, as Michael Leon Warner Jr.'s sister once said, did they all have the same size feet then? Or did police collect footprints in a particular size range, such as anyone with a foot between size 6 to size 15 in men's or size 7.5 to 16.5 in women's? Robert Odell Waters was never held at the Beaufort County Jail. He was at the Beaufort County Detention Center, a privately owned prison. Waters was booked into jail at 6:24 p.m. on Sunday, April 30th, 2023, but he wasn't arrested until Monday, May 1st, 2023. He had a hearing scheduled for 8 a.m. on May 1st, but it doesn't show a completion date. See, we wonder what time he was arrested on May 1st, 2023, if he had a bond hearing set for 8 a.m. that same day. Robert Odell Waters owned a plumbing company in Beaufort County, South Carolina, called Waters Plumbing of the Low Country. Angie.com lists the company as licensed and insured. In South Carolina, all residential licensed contractors are required to have their fingerprints taken when applying for the license. The fingerprints are then ran through the FBI's criminal database, according to South Carolina's Department of Insurance. This means the authorities failed to notice that Waters' fingerprints had already been on record for quite some time, in plain sight. When authorities were investigating Robert Odell Waters, they claimed he had no criminal record, but these records from Beaufort County, South Carolina, prove otherwise. Waters' boat was seized in August 2011 in a criminal traffic type of violation. Therefore, Waters was arrested in 2011 and should have already been fingerprinted. The authorities would have needed to fingerprint him because of the stated reason that he had no criminal record. It is concerning that authorities overlooked this fact. This shows that Robert Odell Waters had indeed been arrested in 2011 at the time his boat was seized for a criminal traffic violation. We spoke with an official in Beaufort County, South Carolina, who told us Waters would have definitely been fingerprinted at the time of being arrested and charged. Robert Odell Waters was also arrested in Arizona in 1989 and would have had his fingerprints taken at the time. Waters even had a warrant out for his arrest in Maricopa County, Arizona, after he moved into the state, which once again makes the case for his fingerprints already being taken. Robert Odell Waters' mugshot was taken 15 minutes before he was arrested for the Cathy Sue Swartz murder. This raises questions and concerns about standard operating procedure. Authorities would have needed high confidence he committed the murder in order to take a mugshot before he was even arrested, which is unlikely due to only having an alleged fingerprint and unconfirmed DNA evidence with nothing else to go by. Or if this was due to a technical error in the times on the recording and photograph devices, which seems unlikely. Raymond Walter Fegley is the only inmate death listed in Beaufort County, South Carolina on the same day, as Robert Odell Waters was supposed to have died there on May 6, 2023. The screenshot is a search of released inmates. It's from April 30th, 2023 to May 10th, 2023. Next, I'm going to show you 5 screenshots from the official investigation into Robert Odell Waters' untimely death and explain the contradicting discrepancies found in them. Did C.O. Larry Shaw cut the sheet off from around Robert Odell Waters' neck? Or did he loosen the knot in the sheet? Was Waters found sitting on the floor or hanging by the top bunk bed? Or was Waters found sitting with his back against the bunk and a sheet around his neck, and sitting on his butt with his legs stretched out in front of him? Which one was it? Was Waters' dead body medium warm, as Nurse Banks stated, or cold to the touch, like Emergency Medical Services, EMS, may have said? Someone is lying in these accounts of that day. However, we believe that EMS would have no reason to lie. These are concerning contradicting discrepancies in the official investigation into Waters' death. Also, according to Joshua Thomas Barnes in the report, one person said when Waters was found he was blue, while another person said he was red. Waters' corpse being medium warm would mean he may have died 3 to 8 hours prior to being discovered. However, a cold corpse would mean he died 8 to 36 hours, or even longer before being discovered. Another contradicting discrepancy in Waters' death. That's a photo of the bedsheet from Robert Odell Waters' jail cell that he supposedly hung himself with, but it wasn't cut like C.O. Shaw said he did to it, so he could free Waters from it. However, there is a tear in the bedsheet, but that could have been from a struggle. More of, or the whole sheet would have needed to be cut in order to free someone from it. Robert Odell Waters' death certification, which was available on May 11, 2023, shows his parents were James Herlin Waters and Judith Dangerfield, not John and Judith Waters as Smallcombe would have everyone believe. I would like to live long enough to see Swartz and Shelton's families get justice. Moni and Costello need to be polygraphed, Joshua Thomas Barnes told us. Barnes also had something to say about Costello. In elementary school, I was a safety patrol officer and the next year a crossing guard. Costello stopped my friend Jeremy Price and I while we were walking from Price's mother's house, so we climbed into the back of Officer Costello's squad car. We did it solely because he said that he needed our help and that it would only take a couple of minutes. He then held us all day and into the night, repeatedly going from Mr. Good Cop to Mr. Bad Cop. He insisted that we were lying to him, demanding that we just look at their faces as he stalked people while grumbling hateful comments as he passed them slow enough that they would walk up to the car and try to see who was in the back seat. "Is this what you guys want in your city?" he asked while becoming more and more frustrated as the day went on. "Why would we look at their faces when we don't buy drugs from anyone?" I asked to no response. I told my friend Jeremy Price not to point at anyone, because at 12 years old I already knew what crazy looked like, and that cop, Michael Costello, was terrifying. My friend was an hour in looking at their faces because the psychopath wearing the badge was driving us around locked inside his squad car and kept telling us to. Michael Costello had dropped the boys off at midnight on 8th Street by Broadway. Near the end of the rough ride, Costello told the boys to pick a door, any door, while they were right in front of Cathy Sue Swartz's house. The boys didn't pick any door, so Costello ended up dropping them off on 8th Street after slamming on his brakes and sending them crashing into the divider between the front and back seats of the squad car, causing the boys to slide down under their knees and onto the vehicle floorboard. Then Costello went off on them, raging at the boys like a psychopath. Costello made the boys walk back home from 8th Street by Broadway at midnight. Costello made 2 young boys take a 24-minute walk for 1.1 miles across town in the dead of night. while Jeremy Price had to walk the rest of the way all alone to his house that was 10 more minutes away than Barnes's. Officer Michael Costello's behavior while working for the TRPD during the summer of 1988 was unprofessional and unlawful. He stopped us while walking from Price's mother's apartment into my parents' house as we were headed there for lunch. Assuring us that we had done nothing wrong, he convinced us to get into the back of his squad car, where he held us for many hours, into the night before taking us to Swartz's apartment. I know who supplied cocaine to all the rich people and cops around Three Rivers. I have a friend who used to hear all about Costello regularly from her dealer. Costello owed the drug dealer money, Barnes noted. Joshua Thomas Barnes has met the woman who was Michael Costello's cocaine dealer, and she's still alive. The rough ride in the squad car that Barnes and his friend Jeremy Price were taken on with Costello was illegal. My uncle was being fingerprinted at the TRPD in 1991 when a fight broke out amongst the officers in the lobby. He said he heard them physically fighting, and that they were arguing with or about Costello being involved in Christina Y. Shelton's car crash. My uncle also heard them saying that Swartz had called the station shortly before being murdered to ask about charges she may be facing due to the drugs and money seized from her apartment by members of the TRPD. She was killed before they could take her official statement, Barnes concluded. Barnes' childhood friend John Maxson alleges that Michael Costello would pick him up and drive him around in his squad car before dropping him off by the Peeler Street Bridge with a couple of cigarettes. Knowing that Maxson was reported as a runaway, Maxson would get into Costello's cop car voluntarily. John Maxson also alleges that Costello approached him while on duty and asked him if he ever sold crack. When he told Costello no, Costello just shrugged his shoulders like, "Oh, okay," and walked off. A young woman at the time in 1988 named Michelle Nelson used to play poker in Uptown all the time above the marina. That was pretty much a whorehouse in a bad neighborhood back then. Costello used to play poker there too, down near South Main, where presently there is a Boost mobile store. TRPD officer Michael Costello showed up unannounced and uninvited one evening at Michelle Nelson's Riverside apartment. Costello asked her to drive him down East Main. He had a bottle of wine in his car and said they could go drink down by the river at the cemetery. Nelson told Costello she had just got a DUI a few months earlier, and also told him her friend Bob knew she was with him. Michelle Nelson used to go fishing every day with her friend Bob, and Costello would show up and flirt with her all the time. Costello was angered that Nelson didn't tell him about the DUI before she drove the car for him. Costello told her never to tell anyone. This was just 2 weeks before Cathy Sue Swartz was murdered. Point 1 is the Riverside Apartments. 2 is Paul's Pantry Liquor that used to be Duff's. 3 is the marina. 4 is a cemetery. Michael Costello then allegedly dropped her off and made Michelle Nelson walk from the former Duff's liquor store at Point 2 back to the Riverside Apartments at Point 1, after picking her up at Point 1 and making her take him to the cemetery so he could drink some wine. Michael Costello allegedly made Michelle Nelson, a young adult woman in 1988, take a 29-minute-long walk across town for 1.3 miles while alone in the dark of night. Nelson said she was driving his car, and we wonder if that was a police squad car or if he was in uniform. Michelle Nelson says she's always had a feeling that Costello was involved in the murders. Now ask yourself, who are the true 1988 murderers of Cathy Sue Swartz and Christina Y. Shelton in Three Rivers, Michigan? Regarding Barnes's statement about the polygraph tests, while we understand that they aren't 100% accurate, the odds are still favorable to be accurate. Joshua Thomas Barnes has experienced emotional and psychological trauma and damage to this day as a result of the incidents with Moni and Costello in 1988 when he was only 12 years old. Barnes has an instinctual fear of law enforcement that lasts to this day. Barnes's mother was in a terrible car accident in December of 1989 that caused him to black all of these events out for a couple of years of his life until he quit drinking. That's when Barnes started having nightmares and was fighting and talking about police in his sleep. Barnes' mother survived the car accident, but she was in a coma for a long time, and family had to teach her to learn their names and things again. Barnes asked Jeremy Price if he remembered Costello picking them up, and he remembered it the same way. Jeremy Price was also there when Barnes was being attacked by Moni. This trauma and damage have affected Barnes' mental well-being and life decisions negatively. We need justice for the families of Swartz and Shelton, and for Waters to be exonerated, and which will also give Barnes some peace of mind and ease the trauma and damage that he has suffered from for all these years. Earl Stark was a good man, a nice guy who I thought was a great chief of police, and he was a good friend of David Swartz, Cathy's father. The men and women working for the TRPD today are a decent bunch, nothing like the two men, Moni and Costello, who did those things to me. Joshua Thomas Barnes said, praising former TRPD Police Chief Earl Stark and the current TRPD. We do not claim to be a leader of the Legion. The AEGIS Alliance has anonymous allies. They are anonymous. They might forgive, but they'll never forget. You should have expected the Legion.